Now introducing Jeff Mayhugh, Chief Engineer at Navistar. He'll be talking about Auros at Navistar, observations on Knowledge Aware. Take it away, Jeff.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks, Amy, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for your time today. Navistar here, we've been using Auros in our product development organization for about 8 years. So in my comments here this afternoon, I'm going to give an overview of how our Auros deployment at Navistar has progressed over time, some of the key takeaways. And before I do that, I'm going to give a little bit of context about Navistar, who we are as a company, if you're not too familiar with that. So Navistar, we're a leading manufacturer of commercial trucks, buses, and engines. If you see any of our products with the vertical chrome grille bars and orange diamond at the top, that's an international truck. That's one of ours. We're a roughly 13,000 employee company, and we're headquartered outside of Chicago here in Lisle, Illinois. Our products at Navistar, we make a wide and complex product line. We make everything from class 4 or 5 commercial vehicles all the way up to the class 8 on highway, like our LT series. Our trucks can basically be made into whatever our customers require, whether it's construction vehicles, cement mixers, dump trucks, bucket trucks, whatever. We also have our own school buses and powertrains, and we'll be getting into more and more electrification and autonomous as the years go by. So the complexity of our product line was one of a confluence of factors that led us to acquiring Auros in late 2012 for our product development organization. The original vision for our use of the software was to have a single gold source for all of our technical knowledge, to have one spot where an engineer could go to find everything they need to do to get their work done. I would argue that this vision is even more important today, given everyone's remote work and the rate of technology change. So as I cover our deployment here at a high level over the past 8 years, I'm going to be doing so by reference to a tool that Auros uses called a maturity model. But before we get started, I have one polling question, a little bit similar to some of what you have already been asked. But as I adjust my comments here this afternoon, I'd like to level set with what's your level of experience with Auros. So if you would vote in the Attendify, basically I'm interested in whether you're a prospective customer, don't currently use Auros at all, you have Auros, but just a little bit of time, maybe let's say less than 3 years, versus long time, I would call it Auros customer, more than 3 years. So Nicole has already sent me a message on the chat. I know which one she's answering. And so, okay, thanks everybody for chipping in. It's good to see that I have some really experienced folks as well as some prospective customers. So I will try to keep this in mind as I go over maturity model and adjust that accordingly. I'm going to switch. Votes still coming in. Yeah, this is good. Longer than 3 years, majority of folks. Okay, let's switch back to my presentation here and go through the rest of my material. 1 second. Application PowerPoint. Okay. Right, thanks everybody for voting on that. So let's, before I go through the rest of my material, let's talk about what a maturity model is in general. So a maturity model, the knowledge-aware maturity model, is something that Auros Knowledge Systems uses to help gauge or guide deployments as they're going on over time. This is really just one way of characterizing the different phases of the knowledge-aware journey that Jeff was describing in the previous slides. I won't read all of this to you, but in a general, to describe it in a general sense, down the left-hand side, you have different aspects of the knowledge aware at your organization. You know, the scope of your engagement, whether you're allocating knowledge into your flow of work, organizational demand, things like that. And then along the top, you have a level of maturity, level 0 to level 4. So in a general sense, level 0 is probably why you would come talk to Auros or come to the conference to begin with. If you have some work processes that are lagging, if it's pure tribal knowledge, people not really writing things down or writing things down in an ad hoc kind of way. In level 1, you start to address that by forming communities of practice, documenting knowledge in the tool, starting to experiment with different assessments. As you expand the deployment of Auros inside of your organization, then in a level 2, you're getting more communities of practice, you're building them into key workflows, you're not really just experimenting with it as much anymore. With a level 3, you're at more of an enterprise level in terms of your success with this. And then finally in level 4, you're expanding your knowledge-aware processes outside of your own organization into your partner or supply base. So the pros and cons of looking at it from this perspective, you know, you may not know immediately when you move from one stage to the next stage. You know, nobody's really keeping track of this. Your entire organization won't always be at the same point in the process all at once. Forgive me if you can hear my dog in the background here. She's going a little crazy. But in a general sense, Navistar's deployment over time has pretty well followed this organizational maturity model. So the dog was quiet all morning. Now I don't know what's going on. So where Navistar is on this, basically, I would say that we have level 2 or an expanding level of knowledge aware inside of our organization. We have achieved some, but not all of the aspects of the level 3. And so I'm going to highlight for you kind of how we got there, and then what are some of the initiatives that are going to continue to take us forward. So going back to the beginning with this, roughly 2013, 2014 timeframe, where we started with this at Navistar, again, the entire vision was to have a single knowledge base for our product development engineers to go off of. So honestly, we really emphasized the CAPAX to begin with. Our understanding of this at the time, because we had a number of different kind of disconnected sources of knowledge repositories, was to try to incentivize our technical community to everybody go write CAPAX. And a CAPAC was like a lesson learned, something you knew that would lead to success in your design. So what went well about this, with really just emphasizing the knowledge packet to begin with, was that as we trained folks to do this, we got a lot of high quality knowledge that were captured inside of the system. Everything used a value table, which you guys will, if you go to one of the tracks later on, the knowledge modeling, we have a lot of CAPAX with red, yellow, green value tables, pictures, images, hyperlinks, videos, all the background kind of material. We got some really well-written stuff captured inside of the system. So as an example, we have a design practice written about how you attach a hood to a hood hinge. It's basically unchanged since we wrote it in 2013. The failure we had way back when has been avoided. We've used it 20 times and we've been green on it ever since. So from that perspective, this was completely successful in the sense of getting everyone to focus on recent failure modes and get those preventative measures captured inside of the system. What could have gone a little bit better about this initial phase of deployment was honestly that we got, in the way in which we rolled it out, we got a lot of material captured that was broad but not necessarily deep in any one particular area. So one of the key takeaways when it comes to the initial rollout is, I would say, assessments first. So like Jeff was saying in the previous slide, you want to understand how you're going to capture the knowledge from the perspective of the reuse or using it in a future sense. So as opposed to just telling your organization the concept of the knowledge packet and getting them to write them, what we have found is more effective is if you imagine yourself in a future state. I'm trying to sign off on this electrical logic or this 3D packaging of a seat, and then use that pull method to then say what needs to be known, what needs to be documented in order to do that well. And the second key takeaway I have pertaining to that aspect is that doing it strategically is best. If you can then perform that exercise, but on a real work example, if you do it too kind of theoretically, like saying, how should this process work in general, you may have a lot of kind of floating, let's say, floating abstractions. But if you can do it on a real project, in our case, for example, to say, we're doing a new aerodynamic panel for this truck, all the requirements are due in 2 months. Now, what do we need to have documented in the system? That gives people both the context of the work they're trying to capture the knowledge for, as well as the deadline, which is often helpful when you're working on projects like this. The next big phase of our deployment then, if you look at the maturity model, gets to, in the earlier phases, what's called organized experimentation with assessments. So for us, we kind of overemphasized the CAPACs to begin with, and we had a lot of people in our organization wanting to know, where are we going with all of this? Are we just putting the knowledge in another system? We're actually going to use it. So we got the organizational demand to use assessments inside of the Auros system. So for us, we started with what process are we going to start with inside of product development? And it ended up that where we started was the engineering design review. The next step was where in the process are we going to kick these off? So ideally, you want to have these assessments created as early in the process as possible so the knowledge is guiding the work that's being performed. For us, we ended up hooking it to an engineering release at the end of the line, like ultimately through an API integration to say that these assessments need to exist when the engineering release is done. So one of the key things that we found while going through this process with that, this was a good candidate process because a number of the different, everyone was performing this design review activity, but it was performed in a lot of different ways across teams. Some points were using a SharePoint folder. Some folks had an Excel checklist and would print it out, physically check it off, scan it back in, things like that. So the process was always being performed, but was being performed differently across different teams. So we were able to get some standardization by using these assessments basically as the raw material for the engineering design review. One of the key things that we found while going through this is that Auros has a really flexible system for different checks and balances between overall administration and local administration. So if you're a longtime Auros customer, you're familiar with this. What we ended up doing was saying that the assessments would take place in all of our different departmental or engineering COPs, but would go off of a global conformance ballot. In other words, red, yellow, and green were the same red, yellow, and green for everybody. We didn't have people just inventing their own colors or their own abbreviations, but inside of the communities, they had some flexibility to say how the knowledge process needed to be run. For instance, who created it? Was it created off of a set or off of a search result? That sort of thing. It was flexible to work how the different communities of practice needed it. So our organized experimentation with assessments inside of Navistar then led to the first of replacing legacy systems. So as Jeff mentioned in the previous presentation, one of the things that Auros ends up doing is taking the role of separate IT systems that have some job to play in knowledge and process documentation. So in the maturity model sense, you're no longer doing organized experimentation, you're really getting your knowledge into key workflows to drive improved outcomes. So the first system we decommissioned in 2018 was a legacy system we called a requirements verification database. It was something that as we became more successful with the design practice or lesson learned type content, and then applying it, provisioning it to engineering design reviews and releases, we had folks in the organization say, boy, this stuff that you're having me write in here, this seems really similar to the kind of thing that I might write into this other system. Or why am I writing in here, but I'm also putting in here? Do I write something in RVD and then reference a KPAC or whatever? So what we ended up doing was developing a knowledge process that would configure multiple different assessments and reporting around this. Hang on 1 minute. I'm looking in the chat here. Is anyone else's presentation small on the screen? it might be that maybe the form factor of the slides I've chosen. Sorry about that. I do know, though, that typically the Auros guys send these things out afterwards and maybe make the recordings available. Better to make it bigger. Sorry, I'm not sure at the moment how to make the slides bigger. So a couple of the key things that we learned while going through this exercise from the RVD transition were, again, around the balancing of the top-down versus the bottoms-up configuration of the system. In this particular case, we tried standardizing it a bit too much and pre-creating assessments for people based on certain changes that were taking place in a DVP sense. What ended up being better was when we started a program to basically say, okay, now engineers need to make your own assessments pertaining to the changes that are being made on the program. This ended up with some greater buy-in in terms of the content and the CAPEX that were being evaluated. But again, with a trade-off between a top-down and a bottom-up, or a balancing there, we did have all of the assessments for this particular vehicle DVP workflow take place in a centralized community of practice. So you can see there where it says vehicle DVPs. That's one community of practice where the assessments take place, but the knowledge are captured and structured inside of various attribute groups like serviceability, ergonomics, or engineering SMTs like brakes, frames, electrical, exterior hoods, things of that nature. So some of the key takeaways from this step really is just to not be too wedded to the particular reporting methodology. We spent a lot of time as we got this system configured in trying to make the Auros reporting output exactly match what we were getting out of the prior system. So we were trying to do hierarchical roll-ups across different COPs to make the reporting match exactly. And ultimately, once we got the process stood up, it ended up that we were basically just using count reports and reds by exception. That ended up being more effective anyway. So one of the key takeaways there is not be too wedded to the exact format of the reporting in the prior system. Now for a recent project, and I know Nicole was asking what we've been up to here recently. So here's one recently completed project. Again, on the maturity model, one of the next phases in the maturity model is when Auros becomes, the single gold source for all of the practices, learnings, methods, processes, etc. So for us at Navistar, when we started this back in 2013, we started to get our arms around all of the documentation and the knowledge that we thought we had in the organization. And we initially made a division between what we called passive versus active knowledge. Active knowledge was all of the design practices we've been talking about that we were getting captured in Auros. But passive knowledge was more so like a test procedure or a work instruction or a process document, maybe a material spec, that sort of thing. And that was the kind of material that we thought, oh, that's totally different. That goes in this Oracle system. It ended up being an Oracle Web Center content. We called it a filing cabinet, and it had different search capabilities inside of it. So what we found over time was that Auros is not a document management system, but in the interest of expanding the overall knowledge maturity process at Navistar, we had a number of different teams who were writing CAPEX in Auros that would then hyperlink to these documents in another system. The hyperlinks would break. We'd have people writing CAPEX that would reference, I need to meet this material spec, but it wasn't one for one, and it was kind of messy. And of course, in the other system, we didn't have any of the other cool Auros capabilities like push and pull and comments, easy to apply metadata, vitality, communities of practice, local ownership of the knowledge. You get the idea, right? So it took a while, but we went through 4,200 different Word documents, PDFs, Excel documents, and so on. Did a sort of a lean 5S on the material, got it down to what we thought we needed, and then parceled out the ownership inside a new communities of practice inside of Auros. And now that's then become the second IT system that we have decommissioned, which was, like I mentioned, an Oracle Web Center content that is no longer running for us. all of that knowledge is managed in Auros. And now, when we revise the knowledge, honestly, some of it stays in the same format because of ways that we're currently interfacing it to our vendors, but some of it, when we revise it, we break it down into further KPACs so that it can really be used inside of the system. So one of the key takeaways for me when it comes to this whole thing is listen to your users and don't be afraid to change your mind. You know, when we did this effort initially, we thought we knew this stuff goes here and this stuff goes here. And over time, it just didn't end up making sense. And people were asking, why don't you just put all that in Auros? It'll be easier to manage it that way. So for 2021 and beyond, where are we going with all of this? Well, as I mentioned, I think we're roughly at the level 2 with some aspects of the level 3 and a knowledge maturity model. We do have some areas of the enterprise, in other words, beyond just product development, that are starting to participate in product development workflows like quality and procurement. It's not, Auros is not yet their own knowledge base. But what I'm going to describe now next in the next couple of slides, these next couple of projects seem like the logical next steps to me. But to refer back to the maturity model, there's a phrase on there that is handy to keep in mind, which is organic complexity. In other words, as you are expanding this software inside of your organization, you may know exactly which way you think it's going to go, and your users in the business may find strengths in different aspects of Auros software you hadn't expected, and you need to tailor it and adjust as you go on. And that's okay, honestly. That's good, and that's a strength of Auros. So one of the next big features that we're going to be taking advantage of, as Jeff mentioned earlier, is the feature called learning cycles. So this is something that's available now in the IQ3 release. So for us, the aspect of the maturity model that this most importantly relates to is closed loop learning and continuous knowledge sharing being a durable enterprise capability. So right now for us, we close the loop with knowledge capture opportunities, but we close the loop manually. You know, if there is a knowledge capture opportunity, we have different teams writing what's called a KPAC request issue to themselves. I haven't talked too much about the issues module of Auros. We had an incumbent issue manager system that we were happy with, but we have been growing the role of Auros issue feature inside of Navistar with tracking quality projects, signing off of deviations to engineering requirements in some cases, the KPAC request issues, as I mentioned. And so the feature that we're really looking forward to is the idea that Auros will be able to read across these different issues and then identify patterns and suggest opportunities for future learning. Now, I don't know what you guys think of AI. AI is never, in my opinion, going to be smart enough to write its own KPACs. You wouldn't want it to do that. But what computers are really good at is identifying these kind of patterns and then pulling together the team in order to capture the knowledge and move forward. So more of an automated loop closure, I think, is going to be a key strength of Auros going forward. And honestly, if I had to guess, it will drive the next level of issues adoption inside of Navistar here. So for us, after that, the next big thing that I can see us getting into is going to be supply chain and partner knowledge sharing. So on the maturity model, this is your level 4 or extended strategic. You can't really get to this level until you've gotten some of your own enterprise, knowledge management, your own house in order, I guess I would say. But Auros does have the aspect of the system called Partner Portal, which is going to enable us to assign assessments and issues and collaborate with our vendors and partners directly through the knowledge base. So for us, the big opportunity here, as we see it, is that instead of documenting the knowledge down into KPACs or into requirements, and then in order to get a vendor on contract to procure different parts, then reconstituting a Word doc and emailing the Word doc. You don't want to be emailing Microsoft Office products in 2020. So the big opportunity here is to have our supply base work with our supply base in the same way that our engineers would do the work ourselves. So some of the obstacles with this, I know there's going to be a ton of different IT underpinnings into making this work. How do suppliers register? How do we get them in the system? Things of that nature. But I just have a sense that at a future conference, we'll be presenting some success around this general area. And if any of you in the conference today are vendors of ours and want to help us prove this out, let me know. Okay.
Jeff, I don't want to interrupt, but I also want to leave time for questions. We have 3 already teed up. Do you want to go? Do you want to just wrap it up real quick? And then
I will. Yes, I will. So, parting thoughts. Auros definitely ties into Navistar values. Better every day. Wherever you are on the maturity model, it's really just a tool for trying to track your own deployment and getting better over time. So yeah, now let me go through to some of the Attendify questions, and I appreciate you guys.
Do you want to choose the ones, or would it be easier for me to just ask them to you?
Well, why don't you go ahead? Let's do that.
Question from Sung Myung Lee. Jeff, how was your real situation in the real world? What I mean, you used 2 different systems for a while, or even today as well? The existing knowledge management system and this Auros together? Does that make sense? Are you following?
Yes, this is a good question, and I would have to say, when you start Auros at your own organization, you have lots of different systems, SharePoints, document management systems, and so on. And then the continuing expansion of Auros is really communication inside of your org, finding this other material, and continuing to funnel it inside the Auros system. So it's not an overnight thing, but now this is the strategy. This is the knowledge management system.
Okay. And then a question from Jimmy. Great presentation, Jeff. A comment first, and at some point you got to find out the name of your dog. What are some of the ways Navistar has been able to successfully show the value of the knowledge aware to groups unfamiliar with the approach?
Yeah, good question. So basically, Auros, now that we have gotten kind of the traction and the bottoms up interest and started to replace different IT systems, now, it's like supply creates its own demand. So we now have people coming to us that have different processes that are not even in this particular area. Let's say procurement processes or particular software processes for software systems pertaining to a plant. And people understand Auros in a general sense at being able to structure and provision knowledge and kind of eliminate some of the waste and streamline the way things work. So it's just kind of been our success over time and building up different reporting capabilities that's produced some additional demand for it.
Okay, great. Now, Darren is wondering, how long was implementation, and were there pain points you faced with existing systems?
Implementation was 2013 until today and beyond. No, it depends what you mean by implementation. So in a general sense, knowledge aware is a journey. In the initial implementation, just to do each one of these in phases is 6 months or a year of train the organization to write KPACs, start to experiment with assessments, now make it replace another tool, now make it replace another tool. So from that perspective, there's no end to the implementation of Auros, because you're always finding new stuff and making things better. And yeah, pain points, pushback or non-pushback is not the standard. So there's pain points all along the way. But ultimately, I think the value of Auros has been, our success has proven out the value of Auros over time.
It looks like 30 seconds about to answer. I don't know, do we have time? Michaela is wondering if there's any best practices you could share with a new customer considering which workflow to transition into.
Maybe not in 30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay.
Yeah, good point. So I would say one of the most important things is having the organizational demand and finding then the right people to help lead it forward inside of any particular area or department.
Okay, yeah. Very good. Now, someone said the last survey wasn't live, so I'm going to post the survey link right now. See if this one is live. I am not really sure why. I know I clicked through yesterday and they worked for me. But anyhow, we really appreciate you joining us. And Jeff, that was fantastic. What is your dog's name, by the way?
My dog's name is Zoe. Yes, sorry about that. She's normally asleep right over there, but sometimes attached
We
to the
loved
middle of
it.
the day.
We had little dog icons and little comments. It was very cute. So if you didn't get your question answered, you can just reach out to Jeff individually. So just to let you know, now we're going to go into those breakout sessions. You're going to choose either advanced track or beginner track. So that starts at 2:20. So you've got a few minutes. You're going to go back to the schedule tab, and depending on your familiarity with Knowledge Aware, choose either beginner or advanced. If you're advanced, I'll see you in those sessions. And thus concludes this session. So see you in the advanced tracks. All right. Thank you all so much. And thanks for your comments. All right.
See you. Bye-bye.
Yep.